How's it going, everyone? My name is George, and I'm back after taking a month break. And I'm going to start by continuing my series of Spider Man reviews with Spider Man 3, the last of the Sam Raimi trilogy. So, there's going to be spoilers because this movie's been out for 14 years. So, if you haven't seen this movie and don't want to be spoiled, then don't watch this video. If you've seen this movie or don't mind spoilers, then stick around. And this is the one where a lot happens that's under a lot of controversy. Like I said, this movie came out 14 years ago in 2007, and it's gone through a pretty interesting stage in those 14 years. The first 7 years, a lot of people didn't like this movie. It was very popular to hate on this movie. And the last 7 years, things turned around. It gained a cult following. A lot of memes were made with this movie, and I think also a lot of people began to appreciate a lot of the things in this movie. They're not saying it's a perfect movie or as good as Spider-Man 1 and 2. Maybe some people think that, but a lot of people are starting to see that it's not a bad movie. It's a decent movie, or a good movie at least. So where do I stand? I've never hated this movie personally. I'll be honest, like, the first time I watched it, I was very young, so, yeah, I thought it was cool to see, Venom on the big screen, Black Suit Spider-Man. The first few years after, I was like, it's watchable, but nowhere near as good as the first two movies. But over time, when you grow to appreciate something, Spider-Man 3 is one of those things to appreciate. Now, there are problems with this movie, and I'll actually start with the problems, but I'm just going to give a quick roundabout about Spider-Man 3. So, this film starts the opposite of Spider-Man 2. If you recall, at the beginning of Spider-Man 2, Peter Parker was down on his luck, had all the stuff going on. At the beginning of Spider-Man 3, he's on top of the world. Everyone loves Spider-Man, or mostly everyone loves Spider-Man. He finally has his relationship with Mary Jane and feels he's ready to propose to her, and he's doing well in school again. But a lot of things happen. He fights some new foes in Sandman, New Goblin, and Venom, and faces some challenges, including the Black Suit symbiote. So, I'm going to start this review by getting the negatives out of the way, or not everything I would say is a negative, but stuff that I felt like had good potential, but if it had just gone in a different direction, it could have made the film a lot better. So, a lot of people like to bring up with Spider-Man 3 that, oh, it's the amount of villains that are the problem. I feel like that's just been an excuse. It's not so much that there's a lot of villains, it's how the villains are handled, or at least one villain is handled. I think Sandman is handled well, and I'll get more into Sandman later on. Harry, I thought, as the new Goblin, was fine, although I will get into my one issue that I think they could have changed or done better. It's really Venom that tends to be the main criticism of Spider-Man 3. And it's nothing against Topher Grace. I like Topher Grace a lot, and I think he pulled off the cockiness of Eddie Brock that we saw from Spider-Man the animated series pretty well. It just feels like once we got into the Venom aspect, it felt miscast. Like I said, I like Topher Grace, and I thought he pulled off the Eddie Brock personality well. But like once we got into the Venom stuff, it was kind of cringe. And I didn't like how Venom was just thrown into the end of the movie. And I know the story, Sam Raimi didn't want Venom, he wanted Sandman, Harry as the new Goblin, and Vulture as his three main villains. Vulture was going to be played by Ben Kingsley and be a partner in crime to Sandman. And I'm not saying that would have made it as good as Spider-Man 1 and 2, but maybe it could have made for a better movie. And, like, they even said, like, they wanted to split this into two parts at one point, Spider-Man 3 and 4 back-to-back, but it didn't make sense to, depending on how they were going to end Spider-Man 3. Now, personally, for me, the way I could have handled that was maybe have the black suit element into the third film and still have Vulture, but save Venom for the fourth film, still have the final battle where Spider-Man has to take down two villains, and he needs Harry's help after he ditches the black suit, and then tease Venom at the end, and then Spider-Man 4 can happen. I don't know, maybe that would have made more sense at the time, but that didn't happen. And as far as Harry goes, my one problem with how Harry as the new Goblin was handled was, I felt like Harry, the amnesia plotline. So I have no problem with Harry losing his memory, but I felt like instead of his memories just coming back in some kind of montage after him and Mary Jane go behind Peter's back and kiss party, I felt like instead, when Peter's guard is down, it should have been revealed that Harry faked his amnesia. I think that would have worked out better. And that would have added more emotion to the Peter versus Harry fight that happened after Harry forces Mary Jane to break up with Peter. Like, instead of like that being the reason, maybe have it where Harry faked the amnesia and Peter is so hurt from that and he's fed up with Harry still believing that his father was killed by him, and it just adds more to that fight. And I think that was a great fight, by the way. I love the Peter versus Harry fight sequence in Harry's house. Sorry, I thought that was really great action. I like the line delivery from Peter Parker being influenced by the symbiote, but I think that could have just added more to the building tension that has been happening between these two. Now, as far as some of the other things I felt like could have been done differently that had good potential, Bryce Dallas Howard as Gwen Stacy, I thought that was fine as well, but instead of just being used as like a love triangle plot device, because that's kind of what it felt like Gwen Stacy was in there for, maybe have her be the friend of Peter's that helps Peter wake up from reality after he hurts Harry and Mary Jane and like helps him snap back to reality. Like, I feel like you could have done more with Gwen Stacy than just have her cause a love triangle between Peter, Mary Jane, and her. I don't know, that's just how I would have handled Gwen Stacy's character. And Mary Jane, the way Mary Jane was handled in this film, I mean, like, out of the three movies, I don't think this was Kirsten's best performance. At times, like, I will say, like, I do feel for Mary Jane because she even brings up, like, how her Broadway career is not going so well. She's taking the critic reviews by heart. And she even brings up how, like, it reminds her of the things that her father said. And if you recall from the previous films, her father was very abusive and neglectful. So at times, like, I feel bad for Mary Jane. But then she makes some very poor decisions, such as, like, losing the Broadway job and being a singing waitress, a secret from Peter. I just like certain decisions that Mary Jane makes that are frustrating and sometimes makes it hard to feel for her. And there was a scene that they were planning on doing, and it actually ties into the next thing, which is Mary Jane is a damsel in distress for the third straight time. It's annoying at this point, but originally that wasn't the plan. Apparently it was going to be Gwen Stacy, and Mary Jane was going to convince Harry to help Peter, and that would have done a lot for Mary Jane's character and fixed a lot of those mistakes that she was making. But Bryce Dallas Howard was pregnant during filming, and so they had to change it back to Mary Jane. Kirsten Dunst apparently was unhappy about it, and Sam Raimi felt guilty. And that kind of explains why you have that forced-in scene where Harry's butler, Bernard, basically tells Harry, like, your father's blade killed him. And it just kind of felt forced. Like, I get it, you can make this case that maybe he just didn't want to hurt Harry, similar to how Peter didn't want to hurt Harry, and just waited because he didn't like the path Harry was going on, but it just feels forced. And I remember, because I have the Spider-Man 3 on DVD and the blooper reels on it, the blooper reel, they showed a couple of times Bernard, the actor who plays Bernard, getting his lines wrong when he was delivering that story about how the blade that pierced his body came from his glider line. He was struggling with that with the bloopers. Now, despite some of my criticisms of Spider-Man 3, I still like this movie a lot. I still think, despite some of those annoying negatives, I still think it's a much better movie than it's giving credit for. Now, I haven't addressed the dancing and the jazz sequence scene yet. The dancing in the street thing, I kind of see it as similar to the raindrops keeps falling on my head sequence from Spider-Man 2 where Peter's walking in the streets, acting dorky but free of the burden of being Spider-Man, the responsibility. I kind of see him dancing in the streets after Eddie Brock is fired as similar, except Peter thinks he's this cool bad boy with the symbiote influencing him. I kind of see it as similar to that. I think it is funny and entertaining, and yeah, I can forgive that because I see it similar to being like that sequence from Spider-Man 2. The Jazz Club one is the only other problem I have with this film. And instead of doing dancing in the Jazz Club, maybe have it where Harry or Eddie Brock confront Peter and he gets into a fight in there, and Mary Jane tries to break it up, and not only does Peter hurt her, but he hurts either Harry or Eddie very badly, or he hurts other people, and that is where like he reflects on his actions, and it adds more weight to the suit really changing him, other than him acting like a bad boy and throwing a pumpkin bomb back at Harry. But despite all that, I still like this movie a lot. The one villain that I think was handled very well was Sandman. I thought Thomas Hayden Church did a great job with this character. I was never a big Sandman fan before this movie, but the movie made me care for him. You understand his motivations. I like the Birth of Sandman sequence. I think the special effects for Sandman were really good. So Christopher Young does the score this time, not Danny Elfman. Danny Elfman and Sam Raimi had a fallout during Spider-Man 2. And Christopher Young does a great job with the score. It's hard to top Danny Elfman, and I'm not saying he did, but he really does a great job of filling in for Danny Elfman. And I thought like this had some of the more emotional score of the trilogy. And the action sequences, especially when Peter Parker's wearing the black suit, are great. Whether he's swinging or he's fighting against Sandman in the subway, I love that fight sequence. And I still think the performances were great. I think Tobey Maguire still did a great job, especially when he's pulling off a different side of Peter Parker, the more bad boy, more angry side of Peter Parker. I thought he did a great job with that. I still think James Franco did a great job, even though I wasn't big on that Amnesia story arc or how it was handled. Even though they don't appear as much in this film as they did the other ones, I think Rosemary Harris and J.K. Simmons did a great job. Rosemary Harris gives another great speech to Peter, and it's about forgiveness. And that was the message of this film. It feels like the Raimi films always have a message, and despite some of that studio interference, Raimi was able to salvage a message into this film, which is forgiveness, and there's a lot of forgiveness that has to go on. Peter learning to forgive Sandman for killing his Uncle Ben, Harry forgiving Peter, Peter forgiving Harry, Mary Jane forgiving them. Like, I really like that he still keeps a message in this film. And this is an emotional movie. And sometimes it can be a little over-emotional. I know some people aren't big on Peter and Mary Jane having some drama. And personally, like, I would have not had Harry force Mary Jane break up with her. I would have it where she breaks up with Peter because of the influence of the black suit. That's just me personally. The other stuff earlier on, I understand. Because if you look at some of the comics, like when Peter and Mary Jane were married, Peter Parker being Spider-Man did take a toll on that marriage at times. I know they're not married in here, but I'm saying relationship-wise, it sometimes takes a toll on Mary Jane. So I like how they were starting to capture that. Raimi still knows how to capture things from the comics into the movie, especially the church bell sequence when Peter's taking the black suit off. Even though he didn't like Venom, he still understood some things about the symbiote and like how the symbiote works. And despite the Sony influence, I think Raimi still savaged a lot in here. And I'll probably touch upon this when I review Amazing Spider-Man 2. But after watching Amazing Spider-Man 2 a couple times, and that movie had some studio influence problems, looking back, Raimi, I think, did a great job of, despite being forced to have Venom in the film, still putting together a movie that might feel a little incoherent at times, but still feels more coherent than we assumed back in 2007. A movie that still has a good balance of humor and emotion. because towards the end, after the final battle, which is great, I love seeing Peter and Harry team up. Peter confronting Sandman about his Uncle Ben's murder and hearing Sandman's story. And then right after that, Harry, after taking a glider impalement and trying to save Peter's life, like them learning to forgive one another, and Harry dying in Peter and MJ's arms is one of the most emotional deaths in a comic book movie. Like, we've gotten many comic book deaths throughout the years, and some of them have been a little more emotional than that. Tony Stark's death in Avengers Endgame, Logan's death in the film Logan. But Harry's death still is one of the most emotional deaths in a comic book movie for me. And just the journey that these characters went on in these 3 films and how it all comes together. And at the end, there's not a final swing, but Peter and Mary Jane getting the relationship back on track, sharing a dance at the end, starring the forgiveness, I'm trying to word the process of forgiving one another. And Christopher Young's score, like I said, great. I love the emotional score. And yeah, with Spider-Man 3, despite those problems or things I felt like could have been done better, I still enjoy this movie. I know there's been some things that were cut out, scenes that were changed around. Maybe we'll see that full-fledged cut, the Raimi cut. I know a few years ago they released a few alternate scenes and deleted scenes, and I really like those scenes. And I think they should have kept those scenes because it added more to the movie, I felt like. But all in all, Spider-Man 3 isn't as good as Spider-Man 1 and 2. And I gave those movies A+, and I think they're phenomenal movies. Spider-Man 3, despite its problems, still feels like a very good movie to me. I don't care what anyone says. Despite those problems I still enjoy this movie. I still have fun with it. And I prefer it over some of the lesser Marvel movies. MCU movies. I'm not saying those movies are bad. But I still can rewatch Spider-Man 3 over, let's say, Captain Marvel or Iron Man 2. So, my final grade for Spider-Man 3, right here, I'm going to give it a B+. And years ago, I probably wouldn't have given it as high as a grade. But the more I've rewatched Spider-Man 3, the more I find to appreciate it. And I know Raimi wasn't satisfied with it, and he wanted to make Spider-Man 4 great, but I know they canceled Spider-Man 4 due to the continued differences between Sam Raimi, Avi Arad, and the Sony executives, and it did lead to the reboot, which is The Amazing Spider-Man. And I'm going to be doing that review either tomorrow or the day after. Haven't fully decided, but I just got done rewatching it, and I'll be reviewing that. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Spider-Man 3. I'm looking forward to seeing Thomas Hayden Church as Sandman again in Spider-Man No Way Home. I think the CGI looks incredible with that. And I'm very curious how they're going to handle his arc, because of the Raimi villains, he didn't die, or on screen he didn't die. Him and Peter made up. And considering how the trailers are showing or explaining how they all died fighting Spider-Man, I'm very curious to see how they're going to handle Sandman's arc in that film. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Spider-Man 3. And what did you guys think about Spider-Man 3? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you think it's gotten better over time? I know some people still think it's not a good movie. I know there's people that think this movie is as good as the other 3 that love this movie. I know there's a few people this is their favorite in the Raimi trilogy. I don't understand why, but hey, we all have our opinions. We can enjoy what we want to enjoy. And I still enjoy this movie, even though I don't think it's as good as the first 2 movies. And what's your favorite movie also with Venom? Because we've gotten 3 films with Venom, Spider-Man 3, Venom, and Venom Let There Be Carnage. I still prefer Venom Let There Be Carnage, but those are my thoughts. And what's your favorite of the Raimi Spider-Man trilogy? Comment below and let me know. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe already if you haven't. Please share this with someone that likes the Spider-Man movies. And if you want to see my reviews for Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, I'll put the links down below in the description. And I hope to see you guys real soon as I continue to cover the Spider-Man movies before Spider-Man No Way Home. Take care, everyone.